The gavel trembled in Judge Margaret Thornfield's weathered hand as 73-year-old Thomas McKenna's arthritic fingers released the leash, his Purple Heart catching courthouse fluorescence like a dying star. Rex, the 8-year-old German shepherd with amber eyes that held decades of battlefield wisdom, planted his massive frame between his master and the bailiff reaching for him. The surrender papers weren't what they seemed. They were Rex's death warrant. Sarah Beth Collins gasped audibly from the clerk's desk, her hidden camera capturing the moment when Rex's low growl rumbled through the packed Virginia courtroom like distant thunder. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, some dabbing tears as they witnessed pure loyalty refusing to bend to human law. Tom's voice cracked like autumn leaves. 6 years, Your Honor. 6 years. He's kept me from joining my boy Danny. The wheelchair-bound veteran's hands shook as memories of his son's funeral flashed behind his eyes. Rex had been the only one who understood. "Clear the courtroom," Judge Thornfield commanded, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. What had Rex sensed that none of them could see? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning mist still clung to the rolling hills of Pequod County when Thomas McKenna had wheeled himself up the courthouse ramp, Rex's steady breathing the only sound breaking the October silence. At 73, Tom carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd seen too much. Vietnam had taken his left leg below the knee, and 5 years ago, cancer had taken his beloved wife, Martha. Now, in this sterile hallway that smelled of floor wax and broken dreams, they wanted to take Rex, too. Tom's gnarled hands, marked by shrapnel scars and decades of honest labor, gripped the worn leather leash that connected him to his last family member. Rex wasn't just any dog. He was a German shepherd whose intelligence blazed behind amber eyes that seemed to hold 40 years of human understanding. The jagged scar across his black muzzle told the story of the trailer fire 2 years ago, when Rex had dragged an unconscious Tom from the flames, trading his perfect face for his master's life without hesitation. "Danny's boy," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible in the echoing corridor. 6 years ago, when the Army chaplain had delivered his son's personal effects from Afghanistan, Rex had been the most precious cargo. Staff Sergeant Daniel McKenna's military working dog, discharged and homeless, carrying grief in his bones like an old war wound. Tom had taken one look at those knowing eyes and seen his son's soul reflected back. The financial mathematics were brutal and simple. Tom's monthly disability check of $1,247 against Rex's cancer treatment cost of $4,200. In the past month, he'd sold Martha's wedding ring, his Purple Heart medal, and every piece of furniture except his bed and wheelchair. The local food bank kept them fed, and the trailer park manager had given him until Christmas before eviction, but none of it mattered if some government bureaucrat in an expensive suit could walk into a courtroom and declare that love was merely a property dispute. Dr. Samuel Evergreen sat 3 rows behind them, his silver hair immaculately styled, his briefcase expensive enough to feed Tom and Rex for 6 months. He'd appeared in Tom's life like a thundercloud, claiming Rex as military property needed for vital research programs. His credentials seemed legitimate, his government authorization genuine, but something in his pale blue eyes made Rex's hackles rise whenever the man came near. Judge Margaret Thornfield entered with the weight of 30 years on the bench, her gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on a nose that had witnessed every human tragedy imaginable. She'd buried her own military husband 3 years ago, not to enemy fire, but to the demons that followed him home from Iraq. Today, she would decide whether another veteran would lose his reason for living to the grinding machinery of bureaucracy. Rex's massive head turned toward the courtroom doors, ears pricked forward with an alertness that made Tom's chest tighten with recognition. After 45 years of partnership between species, some communications needed no words. The courtroom's mahogany paneling seemed to absorb sound as Judge Thornfield's gavel struck 3 times, each echo reverberating through Tom's chest like artillery fire. Rex sat perfectly still beside the wheelchair, his trained posture betraying none of the tension that radiated from his coiled muscles. The morning light streaming through tall windows cast long shadows across the worn carpet, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts of better days. Case number 2023 CV4471, the judge announced, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. McKenna versus the Department of Defense regarding custody of military working dog designation K97742. The clinical language stripped away everything that mattered: 6 years of morning walks, midnight vigils during Tom's nightmares, and the countless moments when Rex's steady presence had been the thin line between despair and hope. Dr. Evergreen rose from his seat with practiced confidence, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor as he approached the bench. His briefcase opened with a satisfying snap, revealing manila folders thick with official seals and government letterhead. Your Honor, the defendant is harboring valuable military property under false pretenses. K97742 represents a significant investment in specialized training and possesses unique capabilities essential to national security research. Tom's throat constricted as he watched the proceedings unfold like a nightmare in slow motion. Rebecca Hayes, his court-appointed attorney, looked younger than his granddaughter would have been, her suit borrowed and her confidence paper-thin. She'd met with him for exactly 27 minutes the previous week, taking notes on a yellow legal pad while explaining that government property claims were notoriously difficult to challenge. Mr. McKenna, Judge Thornfield's voice gentled slightly as she addressed him directly. I understand you've cared for this animal for 6 years. Can you explain the circumstances of how Rex came into your possession? Tom's weathered hands found Rex's collar, his fingers tracing the worn metal dog tags that clinked softly together, one bearing Rex's military designation, the other engraved with Danny's name and service number. Your Honor, my son Danny was killed in Afghanistan 6 years ago. Rex was his partner, his battle buddy. When they discharged Rex after Danny's death, nobody wanted him. They said he was too attached to his handler, too traumatized for reassignment. The words came slowly, painfully, like extracting shrapnel from an old wound. The Army gave him to me along with Danny's personal effects. Said it was the least they could do for a Gold Star family. Tom's voice cracked on the last words, and Rex's amber eyes never left his face, reading micro-expressions that spoke of pain deeper than any physical wound. Dr. Evergreen shuffled through his papers with theatrical precision. Your Honor, that informal transfer lacks proper documentation. The dog's specialized training in explosive detection and psychological warfare countermeasures makes him invaluable for current research initiatives. Private ownership of such an asset compromises national security protocols. Psychological warfare? Tom's voice rose sharply, causing several spectators to lean forward. You want to know about psychological warfare? Rex saves my life every single day. When the nightmares come, when I wake up screaming about Danny's convoy burning in the desert, Rex is there. When I can't remember why I should keep breathing, he reminds me. The courtroom fell silent, except for the whisper of papers and the soft whir of the heating system. Judge Thornfield removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly while she processed the raw honesty of Tom's testimony. Mr. McKenna, while your emotional attachment is understandable, the court must consider legal precedent regarding military property disposition. Rex's ears suddenly pricked forward, swiveling toward the courtroom entrance with laser focus. His massive head tilted slightly, processing sounds beyond human perception. Tom felt the change immediately. The subtle shift in Rex's breathing, the barely perceptible tensing of muscles trained to detect danger in environments where a moment's inattention meant death. "Rex," Tom whispered, his hand instinctively tightening on the leash. In 6 years together, he'd learned to read his companion's body language like scripture. This wasn't simple alertness. This was the stance Rex adopted when death lurked nearby, the same rigid positioning that had saved countless lives in the mountains of Afghanistan. Dr. Evergreen noticed the dog's sudden tension and frowned, his presentation momentarily forgotten. "The animal appears agitated. Perhaps we should proceed with immediate transfer to prevent any disruption." But Tom's blood ran cold as recognition flooded through him. Rex's behavior triggered cellular memories of firefights and roadside bombs, of moments when trusting the dog's instincts meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. "Your Honor," his voice cut through the courtroom's murmur. "Rex only acts like this when there's danger. Real danger." Judge Thornfield paused mid-sentence, her gavel hovering inches above its wooden block. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps approaching the courthouse entrance with military precision. The moment Tom's arthritic fingers touched the surrender papers, Rex moved with the fluid precision of a battlefield veteran. The German shepherd's powerful frame uncoiled like a spring, his 85-pound body flowing between Tom's wheelchair and the approaching bailiff with protective instinct that transcended training. His amber eyes locked onto Tom's face with an intensity that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. "Easy, boy," Tom whispered, but his voice betrayed the tremor of a man watching his last lifeline slip away. The pen felt like lead in his shaking hand as he stared at the official documents that would legally sever the bond that had kept him tethered to life for 6 years. Each signature line represented another day he'd have to face alone, another nightmare with no warm body to anchor him to reality, another morning with no reason to rise from bed. Rex's massive head swung toward the courtroom doors, his ears rotating like radar dishes picking up frequencies beyond human perception. The subtle shift in his posture triggered every alarm bell in Tom's combat-trained mind. This wasn't the casual alertness of a dog watching strangers. This was the battle-ready stance that had preceded every life-or-death moment they'd shared in the Afghan mountains when Rex had been partnered with Danny. Judge Thornfield leaned forward, her 30 years of courtroom experience telling her that something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamics. "Mr. McKenna, is there a problem with your dog?" "He's not just alerting, Your Honor." Tom's voice carried the authority of a man who'd learned to trust his life to canine instincts. Rex was trained to detect explosives, ambushes, hostile intent. "When he positions like this, people die if we don't listen." The wheelchair creaked as Tom shifted forward, his purple heart catching the light as his breathing quickened with recognition. Dr. Evergreen's composure flickered for the first time since entering the courtroom. A thin sheen of perspiration appeared on his forehead as Rex's unwavering gaze fixed on the door behind him. "Your Honor, the animal is clearly stressed by the proceedings. This emotional manipulation shouldn't influence legal." Rex's low growl cut through Evergreen's words like a blade through silk. The sound emerged from deep in his chest, a rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and raised the hair on every person's arms. It was the same warning growl that had preceded the discovery of the roadside bomb that would have killed Danny's entire unit, the same sound that had saved 12 lives in a marketplace in Kandahar. Sarah Beth Collins, the court reporter whose fingers had been flying across her stenography machine, suddenly stopped typing. Her hidden camera, disguised as a large pen in her shirt pocket, captured the moment when Rex's professional training overrode every other instinct. She'd been documenting veteran mistreatment cases for her secret documentary, but this felt different. dangerous in a way that made her pulse hammer against her throat. "Bailiff Morrison," Judge Thornfield's voice sharpened with command, "please check the hallway outside." The burly bailiff, a 20-year veteran of courthouse security, approached the doors with his hand resting on his service weapon. Rex's growling intensified as the man drew closer to the entrance, the dog's body coiling tighter with each step. When Morrison's fingers touched the door handle, Rex suddenly lunged forward against his leash with such force that Tom's wheelchair jerked forward 6 inches. "Rex, no!" Tom's command cracked like a whip, but the dog's focus remained laser-locked on the door. Every fiber of Rex's being screamed danger with the kind of certainty that had kept soldiers alive in the world's most hostile environments. His claws scraped against the polished floor as he strained against the leash, his massive frame trembling with the effort to reach whatever threat lurked beyond the courtroom walls. Dr. Evergreen stood abruptly, his briefcase snapping shut with metallic finality. "This disruption has gone far enough. I demand immediate transfer of the animal to prevent further—" The explosion of sound that erupted from Rex's throat silenced every voice in the room. It wasn't a bark or a growl. It was the primal war cry of a protector facing mortal danger. The courtroom erupted in gasps and nervous whispers as Rex's powerful hindquarters bunched, his entire body pointed toward the door like a living arrow aimed at an invisible target. Tom's combat instincts, dormant for decades but never fully extinguished, flooded back with crystal clarity. "Your Honor, Rex saved my son's life 17 times in Afghanistan before the convoy that killed Danny. He's saved mine 6 times since then, from fires, intruders, medical emergencies. When he acts like this, people are about to die." Judge Thornfield's gavel remained frozen in her hand as she watched the drama unfold. Her late husband had told her stories about military working dogs, about their supernatural ability to sense danger that human senses couldn't detect. The rational part of her mind insisted this was merely an agitated animal, but the widow of a combat veteran recognized something deeper in Rex's behavior. Bailiff Morrison's radio crackled to life with static and urgent voices. "All units, we have reports of suspicious activity in the courthouse parking lot. Possible explosive device in a vehicle." The blood drained from every face in the courtroom as Rex's warning suddenly transformed from the paranoia of an old soldier into the prescient alert of a highly trained detection specialist. Tom's hands found Rex's collar, his fingers tracing the familiar scars as 6 years of partnership crystallized into perfect understanding. "He knew," Tom whispered, his voice carrying the awe of a man witnessing miracle intersect with training. "He always knows." Rex's amber eyes met Tom's faded blue ones in a moment of perfect communication that transcended species. The dog's message was clear as spoken words. "Trust me, old man. I won't let them hurt you." Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The courthouse evacuation unfolded with the organized chaos of a military operation, but Rex remained planted beside Tom's wheelchair like a 4-legged fortress refusing to yield ground. The bomb squad's arrival brought a carnival of flashing lights and urgent voices, transforming the sleepy Virginia courthouse into the epicenter of a crisis that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Tom watched through the tall windows as men in protective gear swarmed around a suspicious van parked near the building's east entrance, their movements deliberate and methodical as they analyzed the threat Rex had detected 20 minutes before any human technology. "Sir, we need to move you to a safe distance," the evacuation coordinator urged, but Tom's weathered hands remained locked on Rex's collar. The dog's amber eyes tracked every movement in the parking lot with the precision of a seasoned sentry, his body language communicating volumes to anyone trained to read canine behavior. The scar across his muzzle caught the autumn sunlight as his ears swiveled to track sounds beyond human perception, processing layers of information that would take electronic equipment hours to analyze. Dr. Evergreen's carefully constructed composure had cracked like ice on a warm pond. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air, and his expensive briefcase trembled in his manicured hands as he watched the bomb squad's methodical approach to the van. Sarah Beth Collins, positioned near the courthouse steps with her hidden camera still recording, noticed how Evergreen's gaze kept darting between the bomb squad and Rex, as if calculating odds in some complex equation that only he understood. "How did you know?" Judge Thornfield approached Tom's wheelchair, her judicial robes billowing in the breeze that carried the scent of dying leaves and diesel exhaust from the emergency vehicles. Her question carried the weight of 30 years presiding over cases where evidence and instinct often diverged, where the truth resided in spaces between legal arguments and human intuition. Tom's gnarled fingers traced the metal dog tags hanging from Rex's collar, feeling the worn edges of his son Danny's identification disc alongside Rex's military designation. "Rex was trained by the best handlers in the Army, Your Honor. He can detect explosives from distances that would make electronic equipment jealous. But more than that, he reads people. He knows when someone's carrying guilt, fear, or malicious intent. It's something you can't teach. It's either in their blood or it isn't." The bomb squad leader, a compact woman whose confident movement spoke of years diffusing death, approached their group with news that would shift the entire dynamic of the morning's events. "The device was sophisticated," she announced, pulling off her protective helmet to reveal graying hair and eyes that had seen too much violence. "Remotely detonated, designed to cause maximum casualties during peak courthouse hours. Without early detection, we'd be looking at dozens of fatalities." Rex's alert posture finally relaxed slightly, though his intelligent eyes continued monitoring the perimeter with professional vigilance. The van had been cleared, the device safely neutralized, but something in the German Shepherd's demeanor suggested the immediate crisis was only one layer of a deeper threat. Tom recognized the signs from their years together. Rex had prevented the explosive danger, but his instincts were still processing additional information that hadn't yet crystallized into actionable intelligence. Dr. Evergreen stepped forward with newfound urgency, his voice carrying a desperate edge that hadn't been present during the formal court proceedings. "This incident proves exactly why Rex belongs in government custody. His detection capabilities are too valuable for private ownership. National security demands that such assets be properly utilized for the greater good." But Sarah Beth Collins had been quietly documenting more than just veteran mistreatment for her documentary. Her investigative instincts, honed by years of uncovering systemic corruption, had detected inconsistencies in Evergreen's credentials that went beyond simple bureaucratic inefficiency. The way he'd reacted to Rex's initial alert, the timing of his appearance in Tom's life, and now his desperate attempt to leverage a terrorist incident into custody transfer suggested motivations far more complex than patriotic duty. "Dr. Evergreen," she called out, her voice cutting through the crowd of emergency personnel, "could you explain why your government identification doesn't match any records in the federal employee database? And why your research facility's address corresponds to a private military contractor with connections to illegal arms trafficking?" The question hit the parking lot like a second explosive device, creating a moment of absolute silence before chaos erupted from an entirely new direction. Evergreen's face cycled through expressions of surprise, calculation, and finally resignation as he realized his carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. His briefcase snapped open as he reached inside, causing every law enforcement officer within 50 yards to draw their weapons in perfect synchronization. "Nobody move!" The command came from multiple sources simultaneously, creating a deadly tableau where wrong movement could trigger catastrophe. But Rex, reading the situation with the tactical brilliance that had kept soldiers alive in Afghanistan's most dangerous provinces, positioned himself between Tom's wheelchair and Evergreen with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. The dog's low growl carried a new quality, not warning but preparation for violence. Tom's combat-trained mind processed the developing situation with clarity that surprised him after decades of civilian life. "He's not government," he announced, his voice carrying across the parking lot with the authority of a man who'd learned to trust his instincts under fire. "Rex has been trying to tell us all morning. Dogs can smell deception, fear, guilt. Evergreen has been carrying all three since he walked into that courtroom." The revelation transformed the morning's legal proceeding into something approaching a military operation. Federal agents who'd responded to the bomb threat suddenly found themselves investigating the man who'd been claiming federal authority, while local law enforcement scrambled to understand how a custody hearing had evolved into a multi-jurisdictional incident involving explosives, fraud, and whatever deeper conspiracy had brought Evergreen into Tom's life. Judge Thornfield, watching the drama unfold from her position near the courthouse steps, felt the weight of judicial responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. The morning had begun with a simple property dispute and evolved into something that challenged every assumption about evidence, authority, and the nature of truth itself. Rex sat beside Tom's wheelchair, his massive head tilted slightly as he processed information streams that human senses couldn't access, occasionally glancing at his master with expressions that seemed to communicate complex thoughts about loyalty, duty, and the bonds that transcend legal documentation. Dr. Evergreen's hand emerged from his briefcase holding not a weapon, but a thick folder containing documents that would answer questions no one had thought to ask. His shoulders sagged with the weight of exposure as federal agents approached with drawn weapons, their commands echoing across the parking lot like thunder before a storm. The folder contained evidence of a conspiracy that reached far beyond a simple attempt to acquire a trained dog. Financial records, communication logs, and photographs that painted a picture of systematic exploitation targeting vulnerable veterans and their service animals. 6 months, Evergreen said, his voice barely audible above the sound of approaching sirens and official commands. 6 months I've been tracking Rex, waiting for the right moment to acquire him. He's not just trained in detection. He was Danny McKenna's partner during classified operations that my clients want erased from history. Rex represents evidence of war crimes that could bring down people in very high places. The confession hung in the autumn air like smoke from distant fires, transforming Rex from a beloved pet into a living witness to events that powerful forces wanted buried. Tom's hands found the dog's collar again, his fingers tracing scars that suddenly represented more than simple battle wounds. They were proof of service in operations that someone had been willing to kill to keep secret. As federal agents moved in to arrest Evergreen, Rex's amber eyes met Tom's with an expression that seemed to convey understanding of the larger forces at work. The dog had protected more than just Tom's life that morning. He'd exposed a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of military service and the veterans who'd sacrificed everything for their country. The morning sun climbed higher over Pequod County, illuminating a drama that had begun with love and loyalty and evolved into something approaching justice. The emergency room at Pequod County Hospital became the unlikely stage for the morning's final act, where the stress of near-death experiences and revelations about government conspiracies converged into a medical crisis that threatened to claim the very life Rex had spent 6 years protecting. Tom's chest pains had begun during Evergreen's arrest. Subtle at first, like the whisper of old shrapnel shifting in his leg, but escalating into the crushing weight of a heart struggling against 73 years of accumulated trauma. Rex refused to leave the ambulance, his massive frame filling the narrow space between the gurney and the vehicle's wall as paramedics worked to stabilize Tom's vital signs. The German Shepherd's amber eyes tracked every movement, every beeping monitor, every concerned expression that crossed the medical team's faces. His training had taught him to detect explosives and hostile intent, but instinct, older than warfare, told him that his master was slipping away into territory where loyalty couldn't follow. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," Dr. Patricia Wells announced as she reviewed Tom's cardiac readings, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that spoke of 3 decades treating rural Virginia's medical emergencies. "The stress has triggered what appears to be a significant myocardial infarction. At his age, with his medical history, we're looking at critical intervention within the next hour." But Rex had positioned himself as an immovable barrier between Tom and anyone attempting to separate them. The dog's presence seemed to stabilize something in Tom's condition that medical equipment couldn't measure. His heart rate steadied when Rex's warm muzzle touched his hand. His breathing deepened when the dog's familiar weight settled against the hospital bed. The monitoring equipment told a story that defied clinical explanation. Somehow, Rex's proximity was triggering physiological responses that supplemented traditional cardiac care. Sarah Beth Collins had followed the ambulance to the hospital, her hidden camera still recording as the morning's events took on the epic scope of a story that would reshape public understanding of veteran care and animal bonds. The parking lot filled with news vans as word spread about the courthouse bombing, the exposed conspiracy, and the heroic dog whose detection skills had prevented mass casualties. But inside the sterile hospital corridors, the real drama focused on whether love could triumph over the biological inevitability of a failing heart. Judge Thornfield arrived as doctors debated whether to forcibly remove Rex from the cardiac unit, her judicial robes exchanged for civilian clothes that made her look older, more vulnerable. The morning's events had shattered her faith in systems she'd served for 3 decades, replacing legal certainties with questions about justice that transcended courtroom procedures. "Doctor, that dog has kept this man alive for 6 years. Maybe we should listen to what medical science can't explain." The cardiac unit became an unlikely laboratory for studying bonds that existed beyond the boundaries of species or scientific measurement. Rex's presence seemed to regulate Tom's autonomic nervous system in ways that traditional medicine struggled to quantify, his steady breathing and heartbeat creating rhythms that Tom's damaged cardiovascular system attempted to mirror. The dog's amber eyes never left Tom's face, reading micro-expressions that indicated pain levels, consciousness fluctuations, and the subtle signs of a spirit deciding whether to fight or surrender. "Doctor." Evergreen's arrest had triggered a federal investigation that reached into the highest levels of military contracting, but the immediate focus remained on the hospital room where Rex maintained his vigil beside Tom's bed. The German Shepherd had refused food, water, and all attempts at comfort. His entire existence narrowed to the single purpose of anchoring his master to life through presence alone. Nurses reported that Tom's vital signs improved measurably whenever Rex touched him, deteriorated when they attempted separation, creating a medical mystery that challenged assumptions about healing and consciousness. The media circus outside intensified as details of the morning's events spread across social networks and news broadcasts. Rex. The hero began trending on platforms frequented by veteran advocacy groups, animal rights organizations, and citizens outraged by government corruption. Donations poured into funds established for Tom's medical care and Rex's cancer treatment, transforming their personal struggle into a national symbol of loyalty, triumphing over institutional betrayal. But inside the hospital room, such external validation felt distant compared to the intimate drama of a man and dog facing mortality together. Tom's consciousness flickered between present reality and memories of Danny's funeral, of the moment when Rex had first entered his life carrying grief in his amber eyes that matched Tom's own devastating loss. The dog had been a living connection to his son, proof that love could survive death and deployment, bureaucracy and betrayal. Rebecca Hayes, Tom's court-appointed attorney, arrived with news that the morning's revelations had fundamentally altered the legal landscape surrounding veteran rights and service animal protections. Congress was already drafting emergency legislation to prevent future cases like Tom's, while federal prosecutors pursued charges against Evergreen and his co-conspirators that could result in decades of imprisonment. The conspiracy reached into defense contracting networks that had systematically exploited veterans and their service animals for profit, using legal technicalities to steal bonds forged in combat zones. Rex's behavior during Tom's medical crisis demonstrated detection capabilities that transcended his military training, reading biological markers of distress with accuracy that impressed even veteran emergency room staff. The dog's positioning changed subtly as Tom's condition fluctuated, moving closer during episodes of cardiac irregularity, relaxing when medication stabilized his master's vital signs. It was as if Rex had become a living medical monitoring system, translating canine instincts into life-saving interventions. The afternoon wore on with Tom's condition remaining critical but stable, Rex's presence providing something that cardiac medications and electronic monitoring couldn't replicate. Visitors streamed through the hospital corridors. Fellow veterans, courthouse employees, community members touched by the morning's events, creating an impromptu support network that reflected the story's transformation from personal tragedy to national inspiration. Dr. Wells found herself documenting phenomena that challenged her medical training, watching Rex respond to changes in Tom's condition before electronic equipment registered the same fluctuations. The dog's behavior suggested levels of sensory perception that exceeded current scientific understanding of canine capabilities, reading electromagnetic changes, chemical signatures, or subtle environmental factors that indicated shifts in Tom's medical status before human observation could detect them. As evening approached, Tom's eyes opened with clarity that surprised everyone except Rex, who had never wavered in his conviction that his master would return from the edge of death. The first words Tom spoke were not about his condition, his pain, or his brush with mortality, but about the dog whose unwavering presence had created a bridge between surrender and survival. "Did we win, boy?" Tom's voice was barely a whisper, but Rex's tail moved with the first happiness he'd shown since entering the courtroom that morning. The question encompassed more than legal victory. It asked whether love could triumph over systems designed to separate and destroy, whether loyalty could overcome bureaucracy, whether the bonds forged in service could survive the peace that followed. Rex's amber eyes seemed to answer with certainty that transcended words. "We won, old man. We always win when we're together." The cardiac monitors registered improvement that defied medical explanation, as if hope itself had become a healing agent more powerful than any medication in the hospital's pharmacy. Outside, the media waited for updates on a story that had captured national attention. But inside the hospital room, the only audience that mattered was a German shepherd whose faith had never wavered, whose love had proven stronger than death itself. The darkness that followed Tom's initial recovery carried a cruelty that seemed designed to mock the morning's triumph, as if fate demanded payment for the miracle of survival in currency measured by suffering. Rex had not moved from his position beside the hospital bed for 18 hours, his amber eyes growing dim with exhaustion while his master's condition deteriorated despite every medical intervention Dr. Wells could devise. The cardiac monitors that had shown such promise during the afternoon now painted a grim portrait of a heart giving up its fight against 7 decades of accumulated damage. Tom's breathing became labored as midnight approached, each inhalation requiring effort that seemed to drain his remaining strength like water flowing from a cracked vessel. Rex pressed closer to the bed, his massive head resting on the thin hospital blanket as he felt his master's life force ebbing away, despite every prayer, every medical procedure, every desperate attempt to hold back the inevitable. The German shepherd's own exhaustion was profound. He hadn't eaten, drunk water, or rested since the courtroom drama began, his entire existence focused on willing Tom to live through presence and proximity alone. "His organs are shutting down," Dr. Wells whispered to the assembled group of family and friends who had gathered in the hospital corridor. Rebecca Hayes stood beside Judge Thornfield, both women united in grief for a man whose story had touched their lives in ways that transcended professional obligation. Sarah Beth Collins continued recording, but her camera now captured sorrow instead of triumph, documenting the cruel reversal that threatened to transform a story of love into a tragedy of loss. The financial reality added another layer of cruelty to the unfolding disaster. Tom's insurance had expired the previous month, a bureaucratic oversight that meant every minute of hospital care was accumulating debt that would consume the donations flooding in from across the country. Rex's cancer treatment, temporarily forgotten during the courthouse crisis, remained an urgent medical need that would require surgery within weeks or face metastasis that could prove fatal. The cruel mathematics of American healthcare meant that saving one life might cost the other, creating an impossible choice between the man and the dog who had become symbols of unbreakable loyalty. Rex's own health was deteriorating in sympathy with his master's decline. The stress of the day's events, combined with his absolute refusal to leave Tom's side, had triggered what veterinarians recognized as sympathetic illness, a phenomenon where deeply bonded animals begin mirroring their companions' medical distress. His breathing became shallow, his heartbeat irregular, as if the invisible threads connecting him to Tom were pulling him toward the same destination. The media vigil outside the hospital had grown into a small city of reporters, veterans, and concerned citizens following the story that had begun with a simple custody hearing and evolved into a national examination of veteran care, government corruption, and the bonds that define humanity's relationship with animals. But their presence felt hollow against the reality unfolding in room 304, where love was losing its battle against biology despite every prayer, donation, and gesture of support. Tom's consciousness flickered between present suffering and memories of Danny's final moments, the last video call from Afghanistan where his son had promised to bring Rex home safely, to give the dog a good life after their deployment ended. The promise had been kept, but now Tom faced the devastating possibility that his own death would leave Rex orphaned again, abandoned to a system that valued animals as property rather than family members with emotional needs that transcended legal classification. "I'm sorry, boy," Tom whispered through cracked lips, his voice barely audible above the mechanical rhythm of life support equipment. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe." The words carried the weight of every failure, every moment when love hadn't been enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them. Rex's amber eyes met his with understanding that seemed to transcend species, communicating forgiveness for circumstances beyond either of their control. The hospital room filled with the quiet sounds of impending death, the subtle changes in breathing patterns, the irregular beeping of monitors, the soft whispers of medical staff preparing for the inevitable. Rex's massive frame trembled with exhaustion and grief, his strength finally failing after hours of maintaining a vigil that had demanded everything he possessed. For the first time since entering the courthouse that morning, the German shepherd's eyes closed as if accepting that some battles couldn't be won through determination alone. Dr. Wells checked her watch and made notes on Tom's chart with the mechanical precision of someone who had witnessed too many such endings, where love proved insufficient against the biological realities of aging and disease. The morning's triumph, the exposed conspiracy, the prevented bombing, the national outpouring of support, felt distant and meaningless compared to the intimate tragedy unfolding between a man and his dog in a sterile hospital room where hope was dying by degrees. Outside, the media prepared for a story that would break hearts across America, the tragic conclusion to a tale that had briefly suggested that loyalty and love could triumph over any obstacle. The miracle began not with fanfare or divine intervention, but with the simple warmth of a dog's body pressed against a dying man's chest, Rex's steady heartbeat creating a rhythm that Tom's failing cardiovascular system began to echo like an orchestra finding its conductor. Dr. Wells later described it as the most inexplicable medical phenomenon of her 30-year career, watching two beings so deeply connected that one's life force literally sustained the other's when traditional medicine had exhausted its arsenal of healing. Rex's massive frame had settled across Tom's torso with instinctive precision, his weight distributed to avoid Tom's surgical sites while maximizing contact with the areas where circulation was most critical. The German Shepherd's body temperature, running naturally higher than human normal, began warming Tom's extremities in ways that restored blood flow to areas where hypothermia had been setting in. The cardiac monitors registered changes that defied clinical explanation as Tom's arrhythmic heartbeat gradually synchronized with Rex's powerful, steady pulse. "It's impossible," Dr. Wells murmured to herself as she watched the readouts transform from critical failure to stable recovery over the course of 20 minutes. His oxygen saturation is improving, blood pressure stabilizing, cardiac rhythm returning to normal parameters. There's no medical precedent for this kind of spontaneous recovery. But the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, Rex's presence was triggering physiological responses that supplemented every medication and intervention they had attempted. Sarah Beth Collins captured the transformation through her hidden camera, documenting what would become the most viewed veterinary miracle video in Internet history. Rex's amber eyes never left Tom's face as color returned to the old veteran's pallor, as his breathing deepened from the shallow gasps of impending death to the steady respirations of healing sleep. The dog's own condition improved in parallel, as if the act of saving his master had restored his own will to live. The federal investigation into Dr. Evergreen's conspiracy had meanwhile uncovered revelations that transformed the morning's courthouse drama into a national scandal reaching the highest levels of government. FBI agents working through the night had traced financial records, communication logs, and classified documents that painted a picture of systematic exploitation targeting not just Tom and Rex but hundreds of veterans and their service animals across multiple states. Evergreen's operation had been stealing and reselling military working dogs to private contractors, foreign governments, and research facilities with no regard for the bonds forged in combat zones. Rebecca Hayes arrived at the hospital with news that would have seemed impossible 12 hours earlier. "Tom, the Attorney General is personally overseeing this case. Evergreen's arrest has triggered a federal investigation that's already resulted in 17 additional arrests, including 3 Pentagon officials and a sitting congressman. Your story has exposed the largest military fraud case in decades." But more importantly for Tom's immediate future, the investigation had revealed that Rex's cancer treatment had been sabotaged by Evergreen's associates as part of their campaign to force Tom into surrendering his companion. The expensive medical bills that had driven Tom to bankruptcy were inflated by 400% charged for procedures that Rex had never received, medications that were never administered. The real cost of treating Rex's cancer was entirely manageable with proper veterinary care. Judge Thornfield's presence at Tom's bedside carried weight beyond personal concern. She had spent the night researching legal precedents, consulting with federal prosecutors, and drafting judicial opinions that would protect veterans' rights to keep their service animals regardless of bureaucratic challenges. Tom, I'm signing an emergency protective order that makes Rex legally yours in perpetuity. No government agency, private contractor, or military organization can ever again challenge your custody of this dog. The revelation that struck Tom with the force of divine justice came through Rebecca's careful investigation of military records that Evergreen had tried to suppress. Tom, there's something else you need to know about Rex and Danny. Her voice carried the weight of truth that would reshape everything Tom thought he understood about his son's death and Rex's subsequent placement in his care. The classified documents revealed that Danny McKenna's convoy had been deliberately routed through Taliban territory as part of an operation designed to capture Rex for illegal sale to foreign interests. Danny had discovered the conspiracy and threatened to expose it, leading to his assassination by the same forces that had later targeted Tom. Rex hadn't been randomly assigned to Tom after Danny's death. The dog had been placed with Tom because military investigators knew that Rex was a living witness to war crimes that needed protection. Your son died trying to protect Rex from the same people who tried to steal him from you today, Rebecca explained, her voice breaking with emotion. Danny knew that Rex carried evidence of illegal operations, and he gave his life to ensure that evidence would survive. Rex isn't just your companion, he's your son's final act of service to his country. The dog tags on Rex's collar took on new meaning as Tom's trembling fingers traced the metal that connected 3 generations of service and sacrifice. Danny's identification disc wasn't just a memorial, it was proof of a legacy that transcended individual lives, representing values that corrupt officials had tried to destroy through greed and betrayal. Rex had been protecting more than just Tom's life. He had been safeguarding the integrity of military service itself. Dr. Evergreen's final confession, delivered through federal prosecutors as part of his plea agreement, revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that Rex had helped expose. The operation had been systematically targeting elderly veterans, isolating them from their service animals through legal technicalities, financial pressure, and bureaucratic intimidation. Rex's detection of the courthouse bomb had been no coincidence. Evergreen's associates had planted the device as a distraction during what was supposed to be the final phase of stealing Rex from Tom. The medical miracle of Tom's recovery became secondary to the larger miracle of justice being served through the courage of a man and dog who had refused to surrender their bond despite overwhelming odds. Rex's presence had not only saved Tom's life, but had exposed a network of corruption that had been exploiting veterans across the nation. The German Shepherd's loyalty had become a catalyst for systemic change that would protect countless other veteran-animal partnerships from similar exploitation. As dawn broke over Pequod County Hospital, Tom's eyes opened with clarity that seemed to encompass not just his own survival, but understanding of the larger forces that had brought them to this moment. Rex's amber gaze met his with the satisfaction of a mission completed, a duty fulfilled beyond any training or expectation. They had begun the day facing separation and potential death. They were ending it as symbols of loyalty that had triumphed over corruption, love that had proven stronger than legal manipulation, and bonds that transcended every attempt to destroy them. The warmth spreading through Tom's chest was more than restored circulation. It was the recognition that some victories are won not through strength or strategy, but through the simple refusal to abandon those we love, even when every system designed to protect us has failed. 6 months after the courthouse miracle that had captured America's heart, Thomas McKenna sat in his new accessible home, a modest ranch house donated by a coalition of veteran organizations, watching Rex demonstrate his latest role as a certified therapy dog at the Pequod County Elementary School. The German Shepherd's amber eyes held the same intelligent warmth that had sustained Tom through his darkest hours. But now that healing presence extended to dozens of children who gathered around Rex each Tuesday morning for what the school called Reading with Heroes program. The morning sun streamed through windows that no longer belonged to a cramped trailer, but to a real home with ramps, widened doorways, and a fenced yard where Rex could run without the constraint of financial worry. Tom's Social Security had been supplemented by a disability increase resulting from the federal investigation, while Rex's cancer had been successfully treated at the veterinary school that had volunteered their services after learning about the fraudulent medical bills that had nearly separated them forever. "Mr. Tom, why does Rex have those scars on his nose?" asked 7-year-old Emma Patterson, her small fingers gently tracing the jagged marks that told the story of the trailer fire where Rex had chosen scars over safety to save his master's life. Tom smiled as he had learned to do again, finding joy in questions that connected him to a world beyond survival and grief. "Well, Emma, those scars are Rex's medals of honor. He got them saving my life, just like soldiers get medals for being brave. Sometimes the most beautiful things about us are the marks that show we chose love over safety." The children listened with the rapt attention that only innocence could provide, their faces reflecting wonder at the idea that scars could represent heroism rather than damage. Rebecca Hayes had discovered during the federal investigation that she was more than just Tom's court-appointed attorney. Military records revealed that she had been engaged to Danny McKenna before his deployment to Afghanistan, a relationship she had kept secret even from Tom during their legal proceedings. The revelation had initially created awkwardness, but had gradually evolved into something approaching family, as Rebecca found in Tom the father-in-law she had thought she would never have, and he found in her the daughter Danny had promised to bring home. "The legislation passed the Senate yesterday," Rebecca announced during her weekly visit, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had helped transform personal tragedy into systemic change. "The Danny McKenna Service Animal Protection Act makes it a federal crime to fraudulently claim ownership of veterans' service animals. No other family will have to endure what you and Rex went through." The law represented more than legislative victory. It was proof that individual stories of courage could reshape institutions when amplified by media attention and public outrage. Sarah Beth Collins' documentary, Rex and Tom, An American Bond, had won 3 Emmy Awards and generated enough revenue to fund therapy dog programs at VA hospitals nationwide. The film's success had transformed Sarah Beth from a small-town court reporter into a nationally recognized advocate for veteran rights, but she still visited Tom and Rex every month to document their continuing story. Judge Thornfield had used the national attention surrounding the case to announce her retirement from the bench and establishment of the Thornfield Foundation for Veteran Animal Partnerships, an organization that provided legal support, medical care, and housing assistance for veterans and their service animals facing financial or bureaucratic challenges. Her first official act as foundation president had been presenting Tom with a Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing his role in exposing the corruption that had threatened countless veteran animal bonds. The trial of Dr. Samuel Evergreen and his co-conspirators had concluded with sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years in federal prison, while the civil lawsuit had resulted in financial settlements that ensured Tom and Rex's security for the remainder of their lives. More importantly, The investigation had led to policy changes within the Department of Defense that strengthened protections for military working dogs and established clear protocols for their retirement and placement with former handlers or their families. Rex's new role as a therapy dog had revealed capabilities that extended far beyond his military training, as children with autism, PTSD, and various learning disabilities responded to his presence with improvements that amazed educators and therapists. The German Shepherd seemed to understand instinctively which children needed gentle comfort, which required energetic play, and which simply needed the silent companionship that had sustained Tom through his own darkest periods. "He's teaching them the same thing he taught me," Tom explained to a visiting reporter from National Geographic who was documenting therapy animal programs. "That love doesn't require words, that loyalty doesn't have conditions, and that sometimes the best way to heal is just to show up for each other, day after day, regardless of circumstances." The transformation in Tom's own health had been as remarkable as Rex's adaptation to civilian therapy work. The cardiac episode that had nearly claimed his life had been followed by a recovery that doctors attributed partially to improved medical care, but mostly to the psychological healing that came from having purpose beyond mere survival. Tom's volunteer work with veteran organizations had given him a mission that honored Danny's memory while helping other families navigate the challenges of post-military life. The afternoon routine that had once consisted of counting pills and rationing food had evolved into something approaching normal family life, with Rebecca and her 2 young children visiting regularly, Rex accompanying Tom to veteran support groups, and a steady stream of visitors who came to meet the dog whose heroism had captured national imagination. The simple act of opening his door to guests would have been impossible in the cramped trailer where financial stress had made hospitality a luxury he couldn't afford. As evening approached, Tom and Rex settled into their new routine of watching the sunset from their back porch, the German Shepherd's massive head resting on his master's lap, while cardinals and blue jays competed for territory at the bird feeder Rebecca had installed as a housewarming gift. The dog tags on Rex's collar caught the fading light, Danny's identification disc alongside Rex's military designation, and now a new tag reading simply "Tom's Boy," legally engraved and federally protected. "We made it, didn't we, Rex?" Tom's voice carried the quiet satisfaction of a man who had discovered that some victories come not through strength or strategy, but through the simple refusal to surrender the bonds that give life meaning. Rex's amber eyes met his with the contentment of a mission fulfilled beyond any training or expectation, their shared gaze encompassing gratitude for second chances, pride in service, and the unshakable knowledge that love, when tested by the worst circumstances, emerges stronger and more precious than before. The story that had begun with a potential goodbye had become a celebration of hello, to new family, renewed purpose, and the endless possibilities that unfold when loyalty refuses to accept defeat. Sometimes the most profound victories come disguised as our deepest defeats. Tom and Rex's story reminds us that the bonds we forge through love and loyalty possess a strength that no institution, law, or circumstance can truly break. When Tom faced losing the one family member who had anchored him through grief, disability, and financial hardship, it seemed like the final cruel blow in a life already marked by too much loss. Yet their refusal to surrender that sacred bond exposed corruption, inspired legislative change, and ultimately created a legacy that continues protecting countless other families facing similar challenges. Rex didn't just save Tom's life in that hospital room. He demonstrated that healing happens when we show up for each other consistently, without conditions, through every storm. Their story proves that even in our darkest moments, when systems fail and hope seems foolish, The simple act of refusing to abandon those we love can transform not just our own lives, but the world around us. Love doesn't just endure, it conquers, heals, and creates miracles that ripple far beyond what we can imagine. What relationship in your life has proven stronger than any obstacle thrown against it? Have you ever witnessed a bond so deep that it seemed to defy all logic and expectation? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the unbreakable connections that have shaped your life.